file is being read, I am not using the CPU to do something. The CPU is free. The JavaScript thread is not doing anything. वो वेला बैठा है. It is sitting and waiting for the operating system to task. Asynchronous का मतलब क्या है कि while the file is being read, I am not using the CPU to do something. The CPU is free. The JavaScript thread is not doing anything. वो वेला बैठा है. It is sitting and waiting for the operating system to respond, which can respond in its own time. That is what an asynchronous operation is. But here I called fs.read file synchronously. So I am doing an asynchronous operation synchronously over here, which basically means कि fs.read file sync will ask the operating system कि यार ये file read करना, and until the operating system responds, the JavaScript thread will be stuck over here. It will not move after this. If there was a for loop that was trying to calculate something important right after, if there was a for loop that was trying to calculate something important right after, this for loop will not run until the file is read. So if this file reading took 300 milliseconds, for those 300 milliseconds, we did nothing. Even though it would have been nice if we could have jumped to the for loop, done the for loop, and then read the contents and logged it. I repeat, would have been better अगर हम किसी तरीके से we could have fired off an event to the operating system. Please read the file. While the operating system is figuring it out, I could have moved on to the for loop, run the for loop. Whenever the operating system returns the file contents, I could have come back here and logged the contents. This would have been better because I would have used time more optimally. If you are supposed to boil water on one side and do dishes and wash your clothes, will you go to wash your clothes and just stare at them while they're washing? Or will you go, turn on the machine, go to the gas, turn on the boiling water, go to the dishes, start to do them, come back to the washing machine, check is it done? It is not done. Okay, come back to the water. Is it boiled? It is boiled. Turn off the gas, go back to the dishes, start to do the dishes, keep moving between the washing machine and the dishes. This is more optimal way to do 3 tasks, right? Similarly, here we are supposed to do 2 tasks, but here we are just waiting for the operating system. It's like staring at a washing machine while it is, for a fact the washing machine is going to take 10 minutes. So there is no point staring at it. It makes sense to move your JavaScript thread to do something else. In this case, to run a for loop over here. Doing the dishes is a CPU intensive task because you are constantly involved doing the dishes. Washing machine is an asynchronous task. You have to turn it on and then the washing machine will do its thing. It's like asking the operating system to do something, operating system will do its thing. Boiling water is an asynchronous task. You will turn on the boil, you can move on and do other things. पानी अपना गर्म होता रहेगा. You can come back to it later. So there are 2 asynchronous tasks here, 1 synchronous task. But even though this is an asynchronous task, we are not calling it asynchronously just yet. We are calling it synchronously. So do we understand how this is ideally an asynchronous task, but we are doing it synchronously? For some reasons, we'll get to what those reasons are and how we can make it better eventually. Do we understand asynchronous operations and how we are doing an asynchronous operation synchronously right now? But very soon, we will see how can we somehow parallelize this. It's not actually parallelizing, but it's actually me, just staring at the washing machine while it is washing, whatever, my clothes, and then coming back to the dishes after the washing is done. Do we understand asynchronous operations? We'll understand them more when we understand HTTP servers eventually and databases, things like these. 94% is good. I will proceed. 92 ho gaya, 91 ho gaya, but I think most people have voted. 91 is good. I will proceed. Come back to this video. There are other videos that we have done that cover the same thing. I'll post those videos. All right, this is the first code. If you understand this code, you can probably understand this code as well. What does this code do? Read a.txt, log it. Read b.txt, log it. Here again, can you see an unoptimality? Can you see how this code is unoptimal? I am firing off a read file request, but then waiting for it to respond. Or respond kar de raha hai. Then I am firing off the read file to request. It's like I have 2 washing machines, but I'm putting clothes in one, turning it on and staring at it. And when it finishes, I take the clothes out. Then I go to the other one, put the other sets of clothes in and start. When I can run these sort of parallelly is the wrong word, but if it ideally makes sense for me to go to the first machine, turn it on, go to the second machine, turn it on, and then wait. Then when the first one is done, go back to it, take the clothes, second one is done, go to it and take back the clothes. That's the ideal way to do it. This code is reading the first file. पूरी रीड हो गई, ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम में 2 मिनट बाद लौटाया. ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम रिटर्न यू आफ्टर 2 minutes, let's say it was a very big file, or the operating system was busy doing other things. Then for those 2 minutes you never really ask the operating system to do the second thing. It would be nice if I can fire these requests one after the other, and I don't care when the operating system returns. That is out of my control. वो तो operating system पे depend करता है, how long it takes to return. So hopefully we understand IO heavy operations, how are they different from synchronous operations. A simple comparison of IO bound tasks versus CPU bound tasks. CPU bound tasks are operations that are limited by the speed and power of the CPU. These require significant computation and processing power, meaning that the performance bottleneck is the CPU itself. This is a CPU intensive task. If I'm on a very fast, Razer CPU by Mac, then this for loop might run faster because the CPU is more optimal, can run for loops faster. If I'm on a very old machine, this for loop will run slower. But every second when this runs, every millisecond when this is running, it is using the CPU to compute something. That is what this for loop is doing. There is no IO bound task here. There is only one, or many CPU bound tasks here. Declaring a variable is a CPU heavy task. Running a for loop is a CPU heavy task. Logging is a CPU heavy task. A real world example of CPU intensive tasks are running for 3 miles. Your legs, ye chhod do. Once I was doing a mile at my college campus and learning Node.js, and a very weird, comparison came to my head. This is that comparison, but it's a very bad comparison, so ignore it. IO bound tasks are operations that are limited by the CPU's IO capabilities, such as its disk IO. You might have heard of, when you deploy your databases, you're very worried about disk IO. When you are talking to a database, you're worried about network input output. How much, bytes per second, kilobytes per second can I get from this network? How much is the disk IO? How many bytes I can read and write from the file system of my machine? These are things that limit कि आप कितनी गंदी जल्दी फाइल रीड कर सकते हो. If you're reading a file, even though CPU is sort of involved, the JavaScript thread is not involved in reading the file. The read file is being done by the operating system on a separate thread. The JavaScript thread can ideally do other things. In this case, the read file function that you see is a asynchronous function call or an IO bound function call. These tasks spend most of their time waiting for the IO to complete. These tasks spend most of their time waiting for the input output to complete, which means they're waiting for the operating system to return something, or many other examples of HTTP requests, database requests that we'll come to later. Real world examples, I hope you understand. If you're supposed to do 3 things: boil some water, do some laundry, and send packages via mail. Would you do them one after the other? Matlab, pehle I'll start to boil the water, keep staring at it, wait for it to finish, and then once it is done, then start the laundry, look at all the clothes, keep staring at them. Once they are done, then move on to going, to send the package. Or would you context switch between them? Would you अपने context को यहाँ से यहाँ बीच में लेके जाओगे ना? That's ideally what you would do. You would start the water, चालू हो गया, move on to the start कर दिया, चालू हो गया, move on to going to the first package वाली जगह, quickly driving the package, coming back, seeing is the bottle void, so on and so forth. You will parallelize these. Sort of parallelize. Parallelize is the wrong word in JavaScript, which is why I'm avoiding the word parallelize. I can come to later why I'm very heavily avoiding the word parallelize in JavaScript. The real word is concurrency, or you're running these things concurrently. Would you start all 3 of these requests together and wait for them to finish? The one that finishes first gets catered to first. The third example seems, like 2 and 3 mein zyada farak nahi hai, but 3 seems like a good one. Fire of this, move on to, whatever. Give your package and, whichever one finishes first, you tend to that one first. This code that we have written is similar to doing these things sequentially, even though reading, whatever, boiling water can take 10 seconds. For those 10 seconds, you could do other things. You are still not doing it. You are stuck over here waiting for the operating system to tell you कि इसके contents मिल गए हैं. Hopefully that analogy sort of, works and we understand that analogy. Before we proceed and we provide or we understand how to write or convert this synchronous function call to asynchronous, before we do that, we need to understand something else called functional arguments. We need to understand something called functional arguments. concept is simple but can get harder to digest. So let me start with a simple example. The ignore all the code that we had written. We understand this code. Let me delete it for now. A simple example is, let's say I describe a function called sum and another function called divide. Actually, subtract is a better one for now. So return a minus b. I've written two functions. The two functions do what they're supposed to do. I can call them, I can log their outputs, so on and so forth. Now let's say I write another function called do arithmetic, do arithmetic, whose job is to take two numbers as an input, a comma b, and take what to do. Subtract करना है या add करना है. So a third argument called what to do. Let's say it is a string for now. Let's say I write code that looks like this. So I can call do arithmetic with something like this. Or I can call do arithmetic with something like this. So answer 1 should contain 3, answer 2 should contain -1. I can log answer 1 and answer 2. What would the function body of this guy be? It should be simple enough. It should be if function body of this guy be? It should be simple enough. It should be if what you want to do is sum, then call the sum function with a and b and return it. Oh. Then call the sum function with a and b and return whatever that returns. A comma b. Else, if it is sub, then return sub of, a comma b. So hopefully that's digestible, the code that I've written. There is nothing crazy that I've seen here, written here yet. There is no functional arguments that I've passed here yet. If this feels complicated, you can also write it like this. Let s equal to this thing and return s. Let s equal to this thing and then return s. I have written a function called do arithmetic. Why? I just feel like it. There are already two functions that have the meat of the logic. कि sum करना है, subtract करना है. I've written a first function. Let's say I force you कि आप sum sub को सीधा call नहीं कर सकते. You cannot call sum or sub directly. You can only call the do arithmetic function, which can call sum if need be, which can call sub if need be. So I call do arithmetic. If I call it with sum as an input, then the sum function is called and its value is returned. Sub as an input, sub function is called, its value is returned. Hopefully this is digestible, readable. कुछ अलग नहीं है. It's just an if statement that we have seen many times. It's just you did a function call, which again did a function call, which is not recursion if you think it's something else. Just one function calling another function. Functions can call other functions, and the function depth can keep going up until a point. That's what I've written over here. This does not yet introduce the concept of functional arguments. But one thing to know in JavaScript at least is okay, functions are what are called first class citizens, which basically means they're like any other variable. Just like, one can be a variable, I can write let a equal to 1 over here. And I can pass a around as variables here. Just like I can pass a as a variable to a function, I can pass, b as a variable to function. I can also pass a function as an argument to a function. This is very, थोड़ा hard for beginners, slightly hard for beginners, but एक बार समझने की कोशिश करते हैं. A function, I can pulse here. And I can pass a citizens, which basically means they're like any other variable. Just like, one can be a variable, I can write let a equal to 1 over here. And I can pass a around as variables here. Just like I can pass a as a variable to a function, I can pass, b as a variable to function. I pass a as a variable to a function. I can pass, b as a variable to function. I can also pass a function as an argument to a function. This is very, थोड़ा hard for beginners, slightly hard for beginners, but एक बार समझने की कोशिश करते हैं. Rather than passing a string as the third thing, I can pass what I want this function to do as the function only कि यार do arithmetic, ये सब फंक्शन को कॉल कर देना, प्लीज कॉल द सम फंक्शन इनसाइड, और do arithmetic, आई एम गिविंग यू टू नंबर्स, आई एम ऑल्सो टेलिंग यू व्हाट फंक्शन टू कॉल, मैं आपको बता रहा हूं कि यार ये सब फंक्शन को प्लीज कॉल कर देना. नाउ व्हाई वुड यू वांट टू डू दिस? देयर इज नो गुड रीजन टू डू दिस. There is no good reason to write code like this. We'll see good examples of when functional arguments are passed, and they're very heavily used in asynchronous code. But what have I done over here? Here, the third thing that I'm passing is no longer a string but a full ass function. मैंने पूरा फंक्शन निकाल के इसमें डाल दिया. I am not sending a string over here anymore. I am literally sending the function as an argument to this third variable that I've written what to do. But ideally I should give it a name like fn, कि एक function तेरे अंदर पास होगा भाई, and you have to call that function with the two arguments जो साथ में आपको पास हुए हैं and return its value. This is what this function is now supposed to do. Now do arithmetic becomes a very complicated function to look at, क्योंकि it is not just taking two numbers as an input, it is also taking a full ass function as an input, which basically means nothing. It means अगर आपने यहाँ sum pass किया तो inside this fn variable, inside this function body becomes this sum variable. That is all that it means. It is a little complicated to digest, but really what is happening is the third argument that you're passing, the fn variable becomes equivalent to that function. It's like ये function का नाम अब fn बन गया है until this function body ends. When I pass 1 over here, a becomes 1, right? B becomes 2, right? So similarly, fn becomes this sum function. And if I call fn, it is equivalent to me calling the sum function जब ये function call हो रहा है. When the first function call is happening, sum is being passed in fn, so it will return basically a plus b. When this do arithmetic is called, sub will come into this function, so this will basically get replaced with sub, and hence what will be returned would be the subtraction of a and b. So what have I done? I have passed a function as a third argument. It is not just taking two numbers as an input, it is also taking a full ass function as an input. which basically means nothing. It means अगर आपने यहाँ sum pass किया तो inside this fn variable inside this function body becomes this sum variable. That is all that it means. It is a little complicated to digest, but really what is happening is the third argument that you're passing, the fn variable becomes equivalent to that function. It's like ये function का नाम, the fn variable becomes equivalent to that function. That you're passing, the fn variable becomes equivalent to that function. It is a little complicated to digest, but really what is happening is the third argument that you're passing, the fn variable becomes equivalent to that function. It's like ये function का नाम अब fn बन गया है until this function body ends. When I pass 1 over here, a becomes 1, right? B becomes 2, right? So similarly, fn becomes this sum function. And if I call fn, it is equivalent to me calling the sum function जब ये function call हो रहा है. When the first function call is happening, sum is being passed in fn, so it will return basically a plus b. When this do arithmetic is called, sub will come into this function, so this will basically get replaced with sub, and hence what will be returned would be the subtraction of a and b. So what have I done? I have passed a function as a third argument. I have passed number as the first argument, number as the second argument, a function as a third argument. Harkirat, what happens if I pass number as the first argument, number as the second argument, a function as a third argument?
अजीब चीज़ है कि जब भी मैं रात में सोता नहीं हूँ या सो नहीं पाता हूँ, तो आप मुझे 6 बजे से पहले ही मैसेज कर देते हो। हमेशा हमेशा ही होता है, मैं नोटिस किया हूँ पैटर्न पिछले 10 बार से लगभग। तो वो यार, वो बोलते थे ना वो हमारे ज्ञान निकेतन में, सुप्रभातम आदित्य दिवस शुभम भूया, शुभम भूया। यस भैया।
Harkirat, what happens if I pass 55 as the third argument here? Fn becomes 55. So it is equivalent to doing, 55 and calling it, which basically is an error. So if you run this code, of course it will break because you can't really call a function after 55. There is no function that's whose name is 55. But if I pass it a real sum function, fn becomes the sum function. When I call it, the real sum function gets called. These are called functional arguments. You can pass them. There are usually no good reasons to pass them unless we reach asynchronous code. They are very important in asynchronous code. fs.read file करोगे तो बहुत काम आएगा, where we will see very soon. But they are very important in asynchronous code, not super important in synchronous code. Here is a similar example. Write a calculator program that adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides two arguments. very soon in them, unless we reach asynchronous code. They are very important in asynchronous code. fs.read file करोगे तो बहुत काम आएगा, where we will see very soon. But they are very important in asynchronous code, not super important in synchronous code. Here is a similar example. Write a calculator program that adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides two arguments. You can divide four functions, and you can create a third, and you can ignore this do operation function over here. You can define four functions. You can simply call those functions. Or approach number two, passing in what needs to be done as an argument. कि sum, multiply, subtract, divide, चार function divide हो गए. But there is a fifth function that I have written, do operation, that takes AB and literally the function operation as an input. कि यार sum करना है. तो over here I am calling do operation with 1, 2 and this whole function. तो इसके अंदर OP becomes this whole function. So when I call OP, it is equivalent to me calling the sum function with whatever inputs were passed here, which is 1 and 2. So it will return 3. We will log 3 on the screen. We can do more examples of this, but these are all very forced examples. We will really see this in action in asynchronous code. So can we move on to asynchronous code? Do we understand function as a first class citizen? Just like you can pass a string, a number, a boolean to a function, you can also pass another function to a function as an argument. You can pass a function to a function as an argument, which is why they're called functional arguments. They're called functional arguments. Very surprising, 95 people are understanding this, 96% are understanding this, because it's not easy to digest the first time. But maybe I'm a great teacher, or you guys are already very smart. Probably that. Functional arguments we understand, so we move on to. We come back to, actually, we don't move on to. We come back to asynchronous code and really writing asynchronous code. Actual में asynchronous code लिखेंगे अब. Until now, we were doing a asynchronous function call synchronously. पागल हैं हम तो, ये सारे मिलके हमें. What were we doing? We were doing something not great. We were calling an asynchronous function synchronously. वो नाम में ही लिखा है. In fact, एक बार मैंने वीडियो बना दी थी YouTube पे, जहाँ पे मैंने गलती से डाल दिया, तो some other YouTuber picked it up and said कि देखो हा ये किया हुआ है, which is bad. Probably fair. This is not something you should in because of performance. Okay, while the file is being read, आप फाइल को रीड कर रहे हो बैठ के, तो your JavaScript thread can do other things, run a for loop, while loop, whatever logic you have right after. So why should you make your thread stare at the washing machine while the file is being read, while the operating system is doing its thing? The question is कि भैया read file is an asynchronous function, हरकीरत. We understand it's an IO bound operation. How can I call it asynchronously here? And here comes another function in fs. ये fs library, general external libraries इतनी cool होती हैं कि you press dot, it shows you everything that you have here. And notice there are two functions here, read file and read file sync. We were using the unoptimal one, गंदा one. YouTube पे गाली पड़ेगी ये डालोगे तो. This is the better one. और interview में गाली पड़ेगी कि why have you written read file synchronously when it is clearly an asynchronous operation, because it depends on the operating system and not the current process. And similarly, read file is going to call this, read this file asynchronously. वाह जी वाह. तो हरकीरत इतना ही चेंज करना था. All I had to do was call read file and not read file sync. Not really, not exactly. क्यों? क्योंकि what did we say? Okay, let's say I write some beautiful code after this, CPU bound code. I am writing CPU bound code. इसके बाद मैंने CPU CPU वाला call read file and not read file honestly. वाह जी वाह. तो हरकीरत इतना ही चेंज करना था. All I had to do was call read file and not read file sync. Not really, not exactly. क्यों? क्योंकि what did we say? कि let's say I write some beautiful code after this CPU bound code. I am writing CPU bound code. इसके बाद मैंने CPU वाला कोड लिख दिया, which is a very big for loop जहां पे कुछ 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 हो रहा है. Which let's say supposed to find the sum from 1 to 100,000. Let s equal to 0, s plus equal to I, and then console.log s. Now, Harkirat, are you telling me कि अब read file is being called asynchronously? So this will get fired, and then the thread will do the whatever for loop, and do its thing log s, and whenever the file is read, the control will reach back here, and contents में वो आ जाएगा. Sort of. But can you clearly see the problem in this? इसमें एक problem है कि अगर ऐसा हो रहा होता, if this is a real asynchronous function call, and the JavaScript thread can move on to do other things, तो how does the JavaScript thread know कि मुझे इसको skip करना है? Ideally, the JavaScript thread needs to skip this, right? ये तो अभी आ रहा है operating system से. The JavaScript thread needs to move on to this for loop, while loop, whatever logic exists after that, and then come back to this and this line of code. अब जावास्क्रिप्ट थ्रेड इतना स्मार्ट तो नहीं है कि वो समझ पाए कि जावास्क्रिप्ट थ्रेड कांट अंडरस्टैंड कि यार दीज 4 लाइंस आई हैव टू स्किप, क्योंकि ये तो कंटेंट्स को यूज कर रहे हैं, व्हिच इज करंटली बीइंग रेड फ्रॉम द ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम. दिस इज एन एसिंक्रोनस फंक्शन कॉल. आई नीड टू डायरेक्टली मूव ऑन हियर टू द सीपीयू इंटेंसिव टास्क. So unfortunately, the code isn't as similar, but we have just learned a concept of functional arguments. हमने क्या पढ़ा अभी कि यार when you are calling a function, you can also pass it another function as an input. What if such a syntax was valid कि यार a.txt रीड करनी है, UTF-8 में रीड करनी है, और जब रीड हो जाए, whenever it is read, then this function को please call कर देना. Please call this function whenever the file is read. It will get a little confusing. Don't worry, we will understand it very soon. But if let's say the code looked like this, the code looked like this, so at least does the original problem go away? कि यार read this file in UTF-8 and whenever it is read, operating system please इसको call कर देना. Please call this. Does the original problem go away? कि यार read this file in UTF-8 and whenever it is read, operating system please इसको call कर देना. Please call this function when the file is read. So these 3 lines are automatically skipped. a.txt, we just call the read file function and we pass the third argument as another function. I can describe this function अलग से also, जैसे हम पहले कर रहे थे. हमने sum अलग से लिखा था. Let me write this अलग से. Let me call this function it is red, operating system, please इसको call कर देना. Please call this function when the file is red. So these three file lines are automatically skipped. e.txt, we just call the read file function and we pass the third argument as another function. I can describe this function अलग से also, जैसे हम पहले कर रहे थे. हमने sum अलग से लिखा था. Let me write this अलग से. Let me call this function file read callback. Let me call this function file read callback. This syntax तो we wrote a while back. What did we write a while back? Sum function अलग से लिखा था, and then do something में we were passing sum as the third argument. But that was synchronous code. Somewhere in the do operation function we were automatically and clearly calling जो भी third argument pass हो रहा है. This function was called, and then इसके अंदर we were calling the sum function. fs.read file, whoever has written fs.read file, which as you can see is an internal library. Whoever has written is probably the maintainer of Node.js, or maintainer of Chrome, whoever wrote V8. In this case, it's the maintainer of Node.js. उसने ऐसा कहा कि यार functional arguments exist. It's not necessary कि आपने अगर एक function argument दिया है, if you have given a function as an argument, it needs to be called immediately. मैं क्या करूंगा, वेन एवर रीड फाइल इज कॉल्ड आई विल फायर ऑफ एन इवेंट टू द ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम एंड यू कैन डू योर ओन थिंग। इसके बाद आपको जो करना है आप करो, आपको फॉर लूप करनी है, अलग डिफरेंट फाइल रीड करनी है, डिफरेंट फाइल रीड करो, यू डू वट एवर यू वॉन्ट टू डू आफ्टर दिस। वेन एवर द फाइल इज रेड, तब मैं ये फंक्शन को कॉल कर दूंगा, आपका कंट्रोल यहां से यहां जाएगा, यू कैन लॉग whatever you want. 3 times you want to log contents, 3 times you log contents. If you want to log it once, you log it once. Just changing the syntax a little bit made this much more performant. क्या ये कोड और परफॉर्मेंट बन गया? बिल्कुल बन गया। क्यों? क्योंकि हमने सिर्फ ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम को बोला, वी जस्ट आस्क्ड द ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम कि यार whenever this file is read, इस फंक्शन को कॉल कर देना। ओके, कॉल दिस फंक्शन। इट्स द सेम एज मी starting my washing machine and telling my washing machine after 5 minutes do a very loud beep. While my washing machine is washing, I am going to do other things. While the operating system is actually reading the contents of the file, figuring out my permissions, I am doing other CPU intensive tasks of finding the sum from 0 to 100,000. And whenever it is done reading a file, it will call this third function as an argument. Do we understand why function arguments make sense heavily for asynchronous functions? Asynchronous functions के लिए these functional arguments, or what are also known as callbacks, callback arguments make sense heavily for figuring out my permissions. I am doing other CPU intensive tasks of finding the sum from 0 to 100,000. And whenever it is done reading a file, it will call this third function as an argument. Do we understand why function arguments make sense heavily for asynchronous functions? Asynchronous functions के लिए these functional arguments, or what are also known as callbacks, callback, इस फंक्शन को बाद में कॉल कर देना, दैट इज व्हाट अ कॉलबैक इज। दैट इज व्हाई दे मेक अ लॉट ऑफ सेंस फॉर एसिंक्रोनस फंक्शन कॉल्स। यार जब ये चीज हो जाए तब इस फंक्शन को कॉल कर देना, बिकॉज इफ यू डोंट डू इट, डू यू रिमेंबर हाउ द कोड लुक लाइक बिफोर? इट लुक लाइक दिस। एंड हियर अगेन द प्रॉब्लम इज हाउ डज द Node.js रन टाइम नो कि इन तीनों लाइंस को स्किप करके दिस इज द कोड दैट आई हैव टू एक्चुअली रन, and whenever the file is read, then contents variable will come, and then these three I have to store. Versus if I write this code, then the Node.js runtime understands कि हाँ, I have to call this function whenever I'm done reading the file. The thread moves on to the next thing where, you know, contents variable इसके बाद कहीं नहीं दिख रहा है। Only when the function is called do you get access to the contents function, the contents of the file that you can log over here. This code will run. It will work as you expect, which is it will fire off the read file event and it will start to do its own thing here, and then it will log, you know, the sum of 1 to 100. The common question you might ask here is, Sir Kirat, ये error क्या है? Shouldn't it look like this? Shouldn't it look like this? File read callback है. Whenever the operating system is done reading the file, it should simply call this function with the contents of the file. Why are you writing error comma contents? Because it's not necessary कि ये file वहाँ exist भी करती है. It's not necessary the file exists. It's not necessary the Node.js has permissions to read from your file. It's not necessary the file is available right now. It might be that the file is very big to be read. And hence, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. If things go wrong, the Node.js runtime will tell you that in this ERR variable. This ERR variable will tell you what went wrong. If everything went fine, ERR will become null and you will get the actual contents of the file here. Another question is, Harkirat, why is it ERR first and then contents? Why is it not something like this? कि अगर सब सही है, then contents. If something goes wrong, then error. Now these are just commonly known as error first callbacks. If you have ever done Golang, you understand, you know, what these are. These are every function in Golang returns two things. The first thing that it returns is an error, and the second thing that it returns is the actual thing that you need. Just a pattern of error first callbacks. Whoever wrote fs.read file really liked the pattern, really liked the error first callback pattern, and hence he wrote the code like this कि यार मैं जब ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम मुझे लौटा देगा, when the operating system will tell me the file has been read, I will call this function first with an error variable, second with the contents variable. तो अगर कुछ error है मैं यहाँ दूंगा. If there is no error, I will tell you null over here. I will give you the contents of the file. So what do you expect to be logged in this case? Logically सोचते हैं, what do we expect to be logged in this case? Does the contents of the file get logged first and then S variable gets logged, or does the S variable get logged first and then the contents get logged? Trick question, logical question, puzzle for you guys. This is the code that I have written. I am first doing fs.read file. पहले मैं फाइल को रीड कर रहा हूँ. Then I am doing this for loop and you're printing S. So will S come first? Will contents come first? Or will it be vague? Will it be vague क्या ऐसा होगा कि कभी कभी s will print first, कभी कभी contents will print first? Let's do a poll and let's see how smart the audience is today. What is the poll? Which one of these three things would happen? Let me quickly create the poll. The first thing is s gets printed first, then contents. The second thing is contents gets printed first, then s. And the third thing is vague. Matlab, sometimes s will print first and sometimes contents will print first. What do you think happens amongst these three cases when I run this code on my machine? All seem like plausible answers, right? अगर फाइल जल्दी रीड हो गई तो प्रॉब्ली ये होगा, एंड यू नो इफ द फाइल रीडिंग टेक्स रियली लॉन्ग देन प्रॉब्ली ये होगा. तो वेग सीम्स लाइक द बेटर आंसर ओवर हियर कि यू नो फर्स्ट vague seems like the better option. You don't know how quickly this callback will get called. It might get called immediately. It might take a really long time to get called. So, you know, this s variable, this for loop might get interrupted in the middle if this function callback happens. So it seems like vague is the right answer. 38% say vague. 17% say contents, comma s, and then 45% the majority is smart with or already knows this. So I wouldn't say smart. I think logically you should arrive at ki, you know, vague is the right answer. But the actual answer is first s gets printed and then contents. Why is that? For that we have to go to the next slide. We will go to that slide very soon, which is the architecture for JavaScript and asynchronous code. Abhi isko nahi dekhte hain. But yes, s gets printed first, then this comes. Why? Because the way the JavaScript runtime, specifically the JavaScript asynchronous runtime, asynchronous architecture works is कि if there is a callback that is being called, if there is the operating system telling you कि file read हो गई, it can't interrupt the current CPU task जो चल रहा है. अगर CPU is busy doing a task, it will keep doing that task irrespective of the operating system waiting to call this callback. मतलब if I make this really, पहले तो let's see does this work, and you know, were the people in the audience correct? First s, then contents. That is true. First s gets printed, then the contents of the file get printed. The second question is, you know, another very good question is, if I make this like a really big calculation, now this calculation might take 5 seconds. You know for a fact in 5 seconds तो file read हो जाएगी. File read does not take more than 5 seconds. A file can be read in, you know, 1 second at max. It's a very small file. So again, the common thought that comes is कि यार this will take 5 seconds. At the first second itself, the operating system should call this callback. And then, you know, after the first second, content should get logged. And then for the next 4 seconds, this for loop should run whatever. But no, you will still notice okay, if the JavaScript thread is busy doing the CPU task, it is, why is it not printing anything? Because it is busy doing this for loop right now. If it is busy doing this for loop, it does not matter that the operating system is ready to call this callback. It does not matter if the operating system is ready to call this callback. The CPU task will keep on happening. After it prints, the CPU task becomes free. The JavaScript thread becomes free इसके बाद कि अब तो मेरे पास कुछ नहीं है करने को. Then it will check कि अच्छा क्या कोई callback call हुआ है? Is there some callback waiting? And if it is, then it will call that callback. So if the CPU is busy somewhere, if the JavaScript thread technically is busy somewhere, it will remain busy and no asynchronous callback can interrupt it. It cannot be interrupted by an asynchronous callback. We will see this in action very soon. Before that, let me introduce remain busy and no asynchronous callback can interrupt it. It cannot be interrupted by an asynchronous callback. We will see this in action very soon. Before that, let me introduce another asynchronous operation. What if I tell you कि print 1 on the screen? Let's do something similar, a simpler asynchronous function call. If I say कि print, let's have two variables, a equal to 1, b equal to 2. I say कि पहले print a comma b. A console.log b. After you have printed these, wait for 1 second and then print their sum. Let's say this is a question that I ask you. Okay, print two variables a, b. Wait for 1 second, then print their sum. Is this program doing what it says? It doesn't. It will immediately print a, b, and their sum. A, b, and their sum. What code can I write here such that it waits for 1 second? Harkirat, you can write something like this. Write an empty for loop that, hopefully, this is long enough to run for maybe 900 milliseconds, maybe 2000 milliseconds, I don't know. But there is some delay. There is some artificial delay I added between printing AB and, whatever. There's some. So if I run this again, notice 1, 2 is printed. And after not 1 second, but, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds, 3 is printed. You can make this exactly 1 second also by doing something like this. Now, this syntax some of you might not understand, but bear with me for a second. Let current or before time equal to date dot now. If let current time equal to date dot now. If current time minus before time is greater than equal to 1000, break. Now the code that you see on the screen will exactly wait for 1 second or very close to 1 second before the for loop, breaks. What does break do? It basically stops the for loop right there and moves the control out. For loops can stop when this condition is not met at some point, or they can also be stopped by this break statement. So the code that I've written might be a little hard to digest, but basically it gets the current timestamp here in some variable over here. And then inside the for loop, as time passes by, this current time variable will keep on increasing as the for loop is, progressing. And there will be a difference between the time that we tracked before, let's say, 9:34 p.m. and then the current time, which will, 9:34:01, 9:34:02, 9:34:03, वो बढ़ता जाएगा. When the difference between them is greater than equal to 1000 milliseconds or 1 second is when we can break the for loop. So this code would exactly after 1 second or almost exactly after 1 second print AB, and then there's some after almost exactly 1 second. If I run this, Notice one, एक second के बाद मोटा मोटा 3 gets printed. So here I have accomplished what I initially wanted to accomplish, which was print AB, wait for 1 second, print their sum. But doesn't this smell like an asynchronous operation? Doesn't this smell like an asynchronous operation? क्यों? क्योंकि कुछ नहीं करना है 1 सेकंड के लिए. For 1 second you are supposed to do nothing. Might as well run a different for loop. अब इसके बाद अगर कुछ कोड होता, you know, whatever, let's say there's some code right after that is a very expensive CPU task for loop that you want to run. Wouldn't it be nice कि जब तक 1 सेकंड तक वेट हो रहा है, उस 1 सेकंड तक हम ये दूसरा for loop रन कर लें? Because during this 1 second you're literally supposed to do nothing, but you are forcefully making the CPU do something. आप CPU से forcefully कुछ नहीं करा रहे हो. You're telling the CPU to literally do nothing and just check कि टाइम 1 सेकंड हो गया, 1 सेकंड हो गया, 1 सेकंड हो गया, 1 सेकंड हो गया. Wouldn't it be nice if over here you could tell the operating system कि यार 1 सेकंड बाद मेरा कॉल बैक कॉल कर देना. You could tell the operating system कि यार after 1000 milliseconds or 1 second, call this callback function. And in this callback function, I can, log a plus b. I can log a plus b in this callback function. And इसके बाद if there is a for loop, expensive for loop that is running, this set timeout is another asynchronous function call you can do that will start the clock somewhere else. There is a separate thread that it's taking care of the clock. 1 second हो गया कि नहीं, and your thread can move on to doing other things. It's the same thing as reading a file asynchronously. What was I doing before this? I was waiting for 1 second synchronously. It's also commonly known as a busy wait, कि मैं CPU को busy रखते रखते wait कर रहा हूँ. I am forcefully making the CPU busy in a for loop, versus here I'm just starting the clock somewhere else and moving to doing other things in the CPU. CPU अलग चीजें कर रहा है. That's what set timeout does. So set timeout is another example of an asynchronous function call, and hopefully you understand why it makes sense for it to be asynchronous, because during that 1 second, now the Node.js runtime can run other things, versus जो मैंने पहले code लिखा था, the code that I had written before, there the function, I couldn't run any logic after that, which was bad. I was busy waiting using a forceful for loop over here. So hopefully you understand clocks. If you remember, for loop over here. So hopefully we understand clocks. If you remember a while back, that is what I mentioned here as well. Yeah, IO have examples of IO heavy operations: reading a file and starting a clock, which is exactly what we did over here. We started a clock, but we delegated the tracking of 1 second to something else. We were not ourselves tracking for 1 second. Now, I mean, let's do a poll. Do we understand here? Examples of IO heavy operations: reading a file and starting a clock, which is exactly what we did over here. We started a clock, but we delegated the tracking of 1 second to something else. We were not ourselves tracking for 1 second. Now, I mean, let's do a poll. Do we understand set timeout and, general things that we have discussed until now, which is, asynchronous versus synchronous, busy waiting, samajh aa gaya, forceful for loop to, whatever, do something versus an asynchronous operation to do the same thing. ये थोड़ा कम समझ आया, ये थोड़ा ऊपर ऊपर से निकल गया. Which is why we will discuss this again. I'm sure there's 1-2 common questions that I have missed. So I'm going to answer some questions. It's only 80%, which is not great for such a initial class. So looking at Q&A now, specific questions related to what I have said here, I would love to answer. Opening Q&A now. Another 5 minutes, I'll do open Q&A, and we'll move back to slides. Why await not work in fs.read file? Don't know why. How to know that function is async or sync? What do we call the function with async but take callback instead of dot then? Yeah, so a lot of these functions, set timeout, fs.read file, were written before promises were a thing. Promises became a thing when I was doing my very first GSOC, because I remember clearly that the promises were taught to be by my very first maintainer back in 2016. So they probably were introduced in 2014. fs.read file is older. They don't want to change it, which is why fs.read file is not promisified. It is whatever. It uses a callback, but there is an fs/promises library that you can use that has promisified versions of fs.read file. Does prompt also act like a synchronous function call? Now, that's a beautiful question. I think prompt also is ideally an asynchronous function call that is forced to be synchronous. So let's see how it works. Prompt will probably let the user, ask for a variable. Prompt message. What do you want A to be? Let A equal to this thing, and then, whatever, let B equal to the second prompt. Now, both of these should be asynchronous, ideally. But this prompt function is sort of written synchronously. Let's look at it. Great question, by the way. Beautiful exercise. कि जो prompt function है, which basically is a function that will take input from you here. I don't know what the syntax is. Prompt. What am I missing? Oh, is this not available in Node.js? I think it's read line in Node.js, but you get the idea. Prompt exists in the browser and not in Node.js, which is why we did not see it. But let's say I write, prompt here. What is your name? Then it will, prompt me to answer this. I will answer this. And ideally, while I am answering this, the thread should do other things, but it will, from what I can see right now, block the thread. So there should be a promisified version of this. If it does exist, I don't think it does. We can Google it. Let's Google. Is there a async/promisified version of prompt? The prompt. Yes, there are several ways to make it asynchronous. There are libraries like there is a prompt.js library, prompt async library that will let you run prompt asynchronously. But the prompt function that we generally write is not asynchronous, unfortunately. I'm even not sure if this is correct. I also think this is incorrect. I don't think this will actually do what it proposes it will do, because the thread will sort of get stuck over here. So I think this is like AI. This is like classic example of AI slop, where it is telling us something which is 99% I'm sure wrong, because it is creating an asynchronous function which under the hood is still using a synchronous function call, which would change nothing. So basically, yes, it is. It should ideally be asynchronous. It is usually synchronous over here, and use synchronously, just like fs.read file sync. But there is a library prompt async. So let's see what these guys are doing to actually hopefully make it async. The example that these guys gave us was incorrect. I wouldn't say it makes prompt asynchronous, but we can read through the code base of this and see what these guys are doing. This looks actually correct, but I can't read its code over here. So let me quickly try to read the code here. If it is readable, it is not. It is sort of readable. Let's see. Prompt function. This looks right to me. The real question is, what is this unpatched function equal to prompt of this thing? Yeah, this might be asynchronous. I could be wrong. It's slightly ugly code that is written, but this seems like this actually might be using a callback based approach and promisifying it. So this library might actually make prompt asynchronous. We can dive deeper if you want. This is like a slightly more off-topic question. Why callbacks? Clock repeat. I will repeat clock and what are callbacks, why callbacks very soon. And someone asked a very nice long question. Basant. So how do I copy this? So I'll start with Basant and I'll recap a few things, then we will proceed. This is the code that Basant has pasted. He says const fs equal to require fs. And I mean, you're saying यहाँ पे ये return हो रहा है, which is expected because a.txt does not exist for you or something like that. Okay. And then this code you're saying it is outputting. So beautiful question, Basant. On Windows machines, or even here, let's see, you might see this error from time to time. He has written simple code over here. Read file sync ./a.txt, which is a.txt file here, UTF-8. It should work. It does work for me. It might not work on some operating systems for many reasons. For example, if I do this, अगर मैं एक folder पीछे चला जाऊं, and then if I run node class 3 /index.js, do you think this will run? No, because आप इसको class 3 folder से run कर रहे हो. So it will start to find a.txt in the class 3 folder. That is, what might be happening for you as well. So if I run this, I receive the same error. K file does not exist. क्योंकि मेरे root folder में a.txt नहीं है. It is in class 2. That's probably what you're doing. But if you want to write generally a more generic solution, the solution that you had written was correct, which is use the path library, because the path library that is being used over here, when you do a path.join underscore dir name this thing, actually this also will probably not work in this case, क्योंकि इसमें भी dir name will become the root directory and there is no a.txt here. So for you, the reason you are seeing this, कि some operating systems में, some terminals में, you can't simply write ./a.txt. You have to give the full path, which in my case will be whatever /users /harkirat /class-2 and then /a.txt. In some operating systems, some bash version that you are using, some terminal that you're using, you have to write the full path. In my terminal, thankfully, I did not have to write the full path, which is why you're seeing the error. Either way, this will fix the error. What path.join underscore dir name this does is it files the full path of underscore dir name. It's just a variable you have access to in Node.js, which will print the current directory. So if I print underscore dir name and run node index.js. Oh, sorry, what was the class called? Class 3. Node index.js, it returns me the current directory. Underscore dir name returns this. So you can just do this also, but path.join is a better way to do it, because the path library will sort of, this also works, but if you galti se write this, path library sort of merges these together, which is why it's usually a better way to join directories together. The bigger thing is, in your case, underscore dir name gives you the full path, versus here you are not using the full path, and in some operating systems you do need the full path and not just ./a.txt. That is why you might be seeing the error. People said recap the clocks wala part. So let's start with a very simple question of let's create a stopwatch. Let's create a stopwatch. What is a stopwatch supposed to do? It is supposed to print 1 after 1 second, 2 after 2 seconds, 3 after 3 seconds. Here comes another function called set interval. कि यार ये एक फंक्शन है जिसको मैं नाम दे रहा हूं callback. Please call it every 1 second. There is a function called callback. You can name this whatever you want. You can name this Harkirat. You can name this interval callback. You can name this callback. Call this function every 1 second. I am telling someone else कि यार हर एक सेकंड में ना इस फंक्शन को प्लीज कॉल करते रहना. While I am free to do other things like a for loop or whatever I want to do, अलग से I can do other things while someone else keeps calling the callback function every 1 second. And what I can do over here is simply print a variable, something like this. Let counter equal to 0, console.log counter equal to counter plus 1. So what will this do? It will print 0 the first second, 1 the second, 2 the third second, which is what you expect from a stopwatch. You expect from a stopwatch to return 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, whatever written. I've written a sort of a stopwatch in Node.js. But the bigger thing to know is कि हमारी stopwatch में 1 second तक CPU, मतलब हमारा Node.js कुछ नहीं कर रहा है. The Node.js thread is free for that 1 second. If I want, I can write a for loop after this that does whatever, finds the sum from 1 to 100, and it will still run while the clock is being maintained by someone else. कोई और बैठा है इस कोने में, and every 1 second is telling me यार callback को call करने का time आ गया. It's time to call the callback function. It's time to call the callback function. But I am not necessarily maintaining that clock using a busy wait or a for loop. I am simply doing whatever. आप लोगों के दिमाग में भी वो आया क्या, भूल भुलैया वाला बंदा, जब मैंने बोला ऐसे बैठा है ये वाला? The thing can do, I can do I is less than whatever, I can find the sum from 1 to 400 while someone else maintains the clocks in every 1 second, calls the callback function. That's the benefit of using set interval rather than writing a busy wait for loop yourself. इसको लिखने का दूसरा तरीका भी है, which is a completely synchronous way, but in that case your thread will be busy running a busy loop for loop again and again and figuring out 1 second हो गया, 2 second हो गया, 3 second हो गया, versus in this case someone else is maintaining that clock. You are free to do other things as you want. One again trick question for you guys. Let's say this is a very long for loop where I'm doing nothing, just finding the sum from 1 to this very big number. And then printing s. Do you think 1 second बाद कुछ print होगा, 2 second बाद कुछ print होगा, 3 second बाद कुछ print होगा, and after 10 seconds let's say this gets printed, or does something else happen? What did we discuss a while back? When you call an asynchronous function, give it a function to call back. कि यार जब एक, अभी मैंने इसको क्या बोला है, this function what is it supposed to do? एवरी 1 सेकेंड इट्स सपोज टू टेल मी कि कॉल बैक को कॉल करने का टाइम आ गया है. बट इफ आई एम बिजी डूइंग माई थिंग, आई विल नॉट लिसन टू हिम. मुझे फर्क नहीं पड़ता वो लॉग. आई डोंट केयर इफ आई विल स्टिल डू माई थिंग ऑफ रनिंग द फॉर लूप. एंड आई डोंट केयर इफ वन callback is piled up or two callbacks are piled up or three callbacks are piled up. So if I run this again, notice 1 second हो गया but nothing got logged. Only after the whole thing ran for a really long time is when the clock started. So if I run this again, now 1 second हो गया, 2 second हो गया, 3 second हो गया, but nothing is getting logged. Why? Because the operating system is telling me कि यार कॉल बैक को कॉल करने का टाइम आ गया आफ्टर एवरी सेकेंड. बट आई एम बिजी डूइंग माई ओन थिंग. इट्स लाइक इफ आई हैव 5 वॉशिंग मशीन्स दैट Why? The whole thing ran for a really long time is when the clock started. So if I run this again, now 1 second हो गया, 2 second हो गया, 3 second हो गया, but nothing is getting logged. Why? Because the operating system is telling me कि यार callback को call करने का time आ गया. After every second, but I am busy doing my own thing. It's like if I have 5 washing machines that I have started, but I am now busy dancing. So I will dance irrespective of the 5 washing machines beeping after every, okay, bhai, ho gaya hai, ho gaya hai, ho gaya hai. I will come to them when I'm done dancing. And similarly here, when I'm done running the for loop, don't you guys laugh? You haven't seen me dance yet. When I'm running the for loop, it doesn't matter if someone else is telling me कि call back, call karo. I will still do my own thing, keep on dancing, or in this case, running a for loop. And जब for loop खत्म होगी तो धड़ से all the callbacks will get called. All the callback number 1 will get called. I will print counter increase it. Callback number 2, 50 जो line में लगे हुए हैं, all those prints will happen together because all of those callbacks are waiting. Which takes us to the last section for the day, which is the architecture for asynchronous JavaScript को. इससे थोड़ा ज़्यादा clear होगा कि why exactly it behaves this way. Why is it that I keep on dancing even when 3 washing machines are waiting for my attention? The answer is how the JavaScript runtime was written, or specifically the async runtime was written. Whoever wrote this decided कि उनको ऐसे लिखना था. They could have decided to write it a different way. Okay, if the clock interrupts, then the callback should get called and you should return over here. But the way they have written it is, if the CPU is busy doing something, it doesn't matter how many people are standing in line, telling the CPU to do other things, telling the CPU to call a callback, the CPU will keep doing its own thing. Eventually, line 14 पे जाके CPU will get free when the CPU can move on to callback 1, callback 2, callback 3. Let's see this in action though. Let's copy this code. And the code that you see over here is very well visualized over here. कि अगर ये code run होता है, some asynchronous code runs, how does it move across the JavaScript stack? The asynchronous JavaScript stack. So asynchronous JavaScript stack. Notice the things on the right. There is a call stack section. ये हर language में mostly होता है. Most languages have stacks. There are 2 types of languages, stack-based languages and register-based languages. Most languages we deal with are stack-based languages. So they have this concept of a call stack. If you've done compiler design, you might have, seen this. इसका काम ये होता है कि as functions are getting called, they keep on getting pushed to this call stack. So if I don't write any asynchronous code, मैं एकदम simple synchronous code लिख देता हूँ एक बारी को. Let me write very simple synchronous code. Function sum a comma b, return a plus b. Function sub a comma b, return a minus b. Function, that's it, I guess. Simple rectangle. I call sum 1 comma 2. I call sub 1 comma 2. And I, let's say, let x equal to this thing, let y equal to this thing, console.log x, console.log y. When I write this only synchronous code, there is no fs.read file here, there is no set timeout here, there is no set interval here. तो ये तीनों किसी काम के नहीं है. The web APIs section, the callback queue, and the event loop. Web APIs section, callback queue, event loop are useless and not used at all for normal synchronous code. तो जब मैं इसको रन करूंगा, what will happen? ये 2 फंक्शन रजिस्टर होंगे. The sum function will get pushed to the call stack. कि अब इसको रन करना है. This function will actually run. It will get popped from the call stack. Then the sub function will get pushed to the call stack. It will run. It will get popped from the call stack. The console.log function will get pushed to the call stack. It will actually execute and print the thing popped of the call stack, so on and so forth. So if I do this, notice sum function gets pushed, a plus b run होता है, sub function gets pushed, a plus b minus b run होता है, console.log gets pushed, pushed, popped. I've only called functions one at a time इसमें, but let me make one function call another function, so it becomes a little more, we can see the call stack actually filling up as functions are calling functions. So if I write something like this, like we did before, function, or let's just do some random calls here. Let's say sub for some random reason calls sum with a and b. It does nothing with the return value. ऐसे ही कॉल कर दे रहा है. जब सब कॉल हो रहा है तो वो रैंडमली सम को कॉल कर दे रहा है. सम इज रिटर्निंग सम वैल्यू बट वी आर नॉट स्टोरिंग इट एनीवेयर, जस्ट वेकस फंक्शन कॉल. तो व्हेन आई रन दिस, अब जब सब यहां पे पुश होगा, सब के अंदर सम फंक्शन कॉल होगी तो सम उसके बाद पुश होगा. As a function calls another function, you will see them getting added to this call stack. As that function executes completely, you will see it get popped from the call stack. If I run this, sum call हुआ, a plus b call हुआ, खत्म, pop हुए दोनों. सब कॉल हुआ, उसने सम को कॉल किया, उसमें a plus b हुआ, वापस आया, उसने a minus b किया, वापस आया, and then console.log, console.log. So the call stack's job is to track the current function that is being executed and the full stack of the functions that came before. If function A calls function B calls function C, console.log. So the call stack's job is to track the current function that is being executed and the full stack of the functions that came before. If function A calls function B calls function C, you will see C, B, A in a line. The function C is currently executing. When done, it will pop off. B will execute. When done, pop off. A will execute the bacha kucha code. That is what the call stack does. Only thing that is needed if you are writing a synchronous language. If Node.js or JavaScript was completely synchronous, if you were reading files synchronously and running clocks synchronously, this is all that you would need. You would not need to answer a complicated question of what are callback queues in an interview. अगर language ही simple होती, but unfortunately, if you are writing a synchronous language, if Node.js or JavaScript was completely synchronous, if you were reading files synchronously and running clocks synchronously, this is all that you would need. You would not need to answer a complicated question of what are callback queues in an interview. अगर लैंग्वेज ही सिंपल होती, बट अनफॉर्चुनेटली लैंग्वेज इज कॉम्प्लिकेटेड. इट इज कॉम्प्लिकेटेड फॉर गुड रीजंस. मेकिंग इट asynchronous frees up your CPU to do other things while your asynchronous tasks are running. Frees up your complicated. It is complicated for good reasons. Making it asynchronous frees up your CPU to do other things while your asynchronous tasks are running separately. So this is where let's look at a separate code now. Let's say I write this set timeout, a function called callback, sol.log callback called. Let's call callback after 1 second. Let's also call callback after 2 seconds. Let's also call callback after 3 seconds. And इसके नीचे let me write a for loop. Assume this is a very long for loop. अभी ऐसा है कि ये कोड ना धीरे धीरे एग्जीक्यूट होता है. This code executes slowly line by line so that we can visualize it. But assume this was a very long for loop. What did we saw a while back? If this is a very long for loop, doesn't matter if how many callbacks are waiting to be executed. They don't get executed until the thread becomes free, until X gets printed and the thread becomes free. Then it starts to print the first callback, second callback, third callback. Let's see it in action. What actually happens when you click on run is the first set timeout starts to run separately here. एक clock अलग से चालू हो गई है. It is not on the main JavaScript call stack or thread. Its job is simply to see कि क्या 1 second हो गया है. Has 1 second passed, and as soon as 1 second passed, it can't push कि यार इसको रन करने लग जाओ. It can't push directly to the call stack. That's not how the architecture was written for this JavaScript runtime. Web APIs section, the separate section, it's called Web APIs because basically set timeouts is not part of the standard JavaScript spec or fs.read file. JavaScript का part नहीं है, language का part नहीं है. It's something that is needed for websites, for browsers, not fs.read file but set timeout, which is why this is called the Web APIs section. के ये सारी APIs जो हैं usually web के अंदर होती हैं. Fetch, XML, HTTP, read, whatever that function is, the predecessor of fetch or set timeout are functions that are not necessarily part of JavaScript, but browser JavaScript, which is why this is called the Web API section. Whenever you call set timeout, यहाँ पे अलग से clock चल रही है, and when the clock ends, it can't interrupt the current call stack. It can't say कि इसको चलाना बंद कर दो, मेरे को चलाओ. It can't say stop running what you're doing, run this. All it can do is push to a callback queue. and hope that eventually the call stack here becomes empty. Eventually all the synchronous code finishes, and then when it finishes, the event loop pulls the next thing from here to here, pushes it here, and then that function starts to execute. When that is done, pulls the next thing, so on and so forth. That is why when I run this, first clock is being maintained, done. Second clock is being maintained, khatam. Third clock is being maintained, khatam. But the callbacks are waiting in the queue. अभी तो ये for loop ही चल रही है. This for loop will run 10 times. Once it is done, as I said, it's running slowly, which is why, ideally तो ये बहुत जल्दी run हो जाएगा. But if this was a very big for loop, it will keep on running and, on the call stack. And the 3 set timeouts are waiting in the callback queue to be run. They are not directly moved from here to here. They are moved from here to here. And when this condition is met, then the first callback is pulled, first callback is called. Khali ho gaya, second thing is pulled, second is called. Khali ho gaya, third thing is pulled, third is called. That is why they wait, and what might feel like pulled, third is called. That is why they wait, and what might feel like अच्छा 1 second हो गया तो ये function call होगा. You might feel कि after 1 second is passed, this function might get called. It doesn't happen because the JavaScript runtime, is written in a way that all asynchronous operations have to wait in a queue and don't directly get to interrupt the call stack. So similarly, if I write a set interval like we had written a while back, every 1 second, call this callback. The set interval will. Okay, this doesn't visualize set intervals. Otherwise, it would have been nice for us to see a bunch of, callbacks here. But ye website only works for set timeout and not set intervals, which is why we don't see anything here. But there's a lot of questions that come out of this. Mostly questions around what will run first. Will this run first? Will this run first? And what happens when I do, this set interval callback 0. Now I've set 0. But still ऐसा होता है कि since it reaches the web API section, it checks कि अच्छा 0 second के लिए run करना है. It is only able to push it back to the callback queue, and hence X will get printed first. Even though I'm only waiting for 0 seconds, which is almost equivalent to me just calling callback. But since I've written set timeout, it will reach the web API section for a second, and then will get pushed to the callback queue, and only when the thread becomes free will it get pulled over here. So even if it says 0 over here, still पहले X print होगा, बाद में callback code will get printed. There are a lot of assignments for a second, and then it will reach the web API section for a second, and then will get pushed to the callback. Get printed first. 0 second set 0 and do this set interval callback 0. Now I've set 0. But still ऐसा होता है कि since it reaches the web API section, it checks कि अच्छा 0 second के लिए run करना है. It is only able to push it back to the callback queue, and hence X will get printed first. Even though I'm only waiting for 0 seconds, which is almost equivalent to me just calling callback. But since I've written set timeout, it will reach the web API section for a second, and then will get pushed to the callback queue, and only when the thread becomes free will it get pulled over here. So even if it says 0 over here, still पहले X print होगा, बाद में callback code will get printed. There are a lot of assignments that can be given on this. We'll try to give those to you guys soon enough. How many of us understand why asynchronous operations work the way they do? What are the benefits of doing this? And the general architecture of async. Now, one thing that's left is promises, जो दिमाग actually में खराब करेंगे. But do we understand callbacks? Do we understand callback-based asynchronous function calls, which is what we've learned today? What we have not learned is promise-based asynchronous function calls that are going to break your backs and make you leave computer science forever. Based asynchronous function calls, which is what we've learned today. Understand callbacks? Do we understand callback-based asynchronous function calls, which is what we've learned today? What we have not learned is promise-based asynchronous function calls that are going to break your backs and make you leave computer science forever. That we'll do in the next class. 88% understood. Open to questions after this. I think we can officially end the class. Yeah, nothing more. One thing, if you guys want to see, we're slowly, reaching the end of Super 30. And placements have been great. So, keep at it and keep doing what you're doing. Let me show you the placements until this point. I was very anxious in this Super 30 because we did not have the best filtering criterias. The interviews weren't as good, but people have been doing really well. I suddenly remembered एक दो लोगों ने मुझे मना किया था अपना नाम दिखाने से. So I'll try to not scroll बहुत ज़्यादा नीचे because they're on the trials. They didn't want to share. So let me zoom in a bit so that नीचे वाले नाम जो हैं थोड़े छुप जाएं. हाँ, तो you see a few names here. These are a little older of the names, but this number has reached 40, and average median is really high. Even the lower ones जिनकी मतलब 9 लाख पे start हुई थी उनकी बढ़ती जा रही है धीरे धीरे. 9 से 11 हो गई 2 महीने में, so on and so forth. So everyone's doing well. The list is long, but I will stop here क्योंकि इसके नीचे जिनके नाम हैं they've told me not to share yet because their trial is still on. But basically all closer, greater than 10 LP for sure. Average much higher, I think. Average is $2,000 a month. Median is $1,500, $1,600 a month. Which is a great starting. Mostly entry level. Like almost no one had any experience. Almost everyone is in college or very recently graduated. Very less people have some experience. So it is sort of possible in this market. The only thing you need is a lot of proof of work and in-depth fundamental knowledge. A lot of interest and maybe some network to get into that company or whatever, a referral. But very possible. And I become very overly bearish when I see a tool come out and then things just stay normal and I talk to founders and it becomes very same only कि भाई फिर वही developer ही चाहिए काम करने के लिए. Probably stay that way. But I don't think hiring would change, honestly. This is my opinion today. Now tomorrow, God knows, AGI comes and some tool comes, it changes. But again, it just hasn't changed at all. And every month the numbers sort of remains the same. We're able to maintain a decent frequency. In Super 30, we're aiming for 50. We'll probably cross that very easily by the time Super 30 ends. So it's fairly possible, I think. If you guys keep at it, मेहनत करते रहोगे तो होता रहेगा. With that, I will end the class officially for everyone. And for the people who have questions, I'm open to answering them. I'm looking at Q&A for the next 10-15 minutes. Okay, a bunch of questions pouring in now in the chat, so I'll just look at them here. Assignments, I think, this is the time to do a lot of assignments now and get comfortable with the syntax. So you will see a bunch of assignments come. You said some thread checks the time given in set time on JS is single threaded. But notice ये जो web API section है ये अलग है. So the JavaScript thread is not the thread that is doing this. There is another thread in the CPU in the browser or in Node.js that is actually maintaining these things. So now you might say, okay, JavaScript is multi-threaded, but no, over here JavaScript is single-threaded. When they say it's single-threaded, they compare it to multi-threaded languages like Java or Rust, where you can actually spawn a bunch of threads and synchronize data between them. Versus JavaScript doesn't let you do that. But yes, if you really look at it, you can say it's dually threaded. कि दूसरा thread यहाँ पे कुछ तो कर रहा है. Yes, there is a different thread that is separately doing something. But the actual code execution is being done by a single thread. Versus in Rust and Java, the code execution can actually be parallelized amongst multiple threads. So there is a nuance to this statement of it is a single thread. Assignment for advanced people can come. There was a Super 30 assignment that is not released yet, but it'll release on Tuesday. So on Tuesday we can send it to you as well. Mikey remind or just ask Rahul and share it here. Let's say you're running some JavaScript code in a server. A request comes while the request is executing. Another request comes. Is JavaScript single threaded? How will the server handle it? What a beautiful question, yaar. Hitesh bhai, क्या प्यारा सवाल पूछा है. The question is, the question states कि if I have an HTTP server that is receiving a bunch of requests, one after the other, but JavaScript is single threaded, does that mean मैं एक time पे एक request handle कर सकता हूँ? That's exactly what we learned today. Happens on what is happening inside the request. Now, if inside the request you are running a for loop from 1 to a million, then yes, एक time पे एक ही handle होगी. The first one will come, control will come. It will run a very long for loop from 1 to a million. After it is done, it will respond and then it will move to the second request. It will run a for loop from 1 to a million. After it is done, return the second request, then the third request will start. But if you're not doing a CPU intensive task, which is generally what happens in backends, कि जब एक request आती है, what you are actually running is not a CPU intensive task, but an IO intensive task, which is talking to a database and retrieving data from there, talking to Redis or a queue, putting data there, retrieving data from there. That is why you can handle multiple requests together, because most operations that are happening when a request comes are not CPU intensive for loops, but IO intensive DB calls and Redis calls and maybe file system for loop. Most operations that are happening when a request comes are not because most operations that are happening when a request comes are not because taking data, they're retrieving data from there. That is why you can handle multiple requests together, because most that is why you can handle multiple requests together, because most operations that are happening when a request comes are not CPU intensive for loops, but IO intensive DB calls and Redis calls and are not CPU intensive for loops, but IO intensive DB calls and Redis calls and maybe file system calls, generally DB calls, which are IO heavy. But yes, if they are CPU heavy, or even if you send a million requests to Node.js server, yes, it might break because irrespective of how big the machine is, if it has 8 CPUs or 16, all the CPU tasks are running on a single CPU and a single thread. And there are ways to make it better and run it on all threads. But that's not technically multi-threading; it's something else. We'll learn that when we reach cluster module and how to make Node.js more optimal. Let's say there are tens of thousands of requests coming to your server. What happens and how will the server maintain context state of these requests? Again, CPU intensive task doesn't matter. IO intensive tasks, every task might start together, right? The JavaScript thread might send a DB call in the first request and then move on to the second request. After all three of these requests are done, even a request coming is sort of an asynchronous function call. We'll see this when we reach Express. Okay, in the end, there is a callback function that gets called whenever a new request comes. So basically all of these might send a DB call in the first request and then move on to the second request. After all three of these requests are done, even a request coming is sort of an asynchronous function call. We'll see this when we reach Express. Okay, in the end, there is a callback function that gets called whenever a new request comes. So basically all of these requests then yes, you have to scale your servers. There's nothing much you can do in a single server. If we have a Foco machine, should we run 4 Node.js processes to run this optimally? That is correct. That is, yes, 100% true. If you have an 8-core machine, you should ideally run 8 different processes. For Node.js, for Rust or Go, you should write multi-threaded code that runs 8 different, not threads, but there are various terms for these things in various languages. For example, in case of Go, you should run thousands of Go routines or millions of Go routines. In case of Rust, you should run a bunch of async tasks or Tokyo tasks, or generally run 16 threads on a 16-core machine. A single process can run multiple threads. A single process in Go can run multiple Go routines. A single process in Rust can run multiple tasks that can run on various threads. But a single process cannot use all of your cores in Node.js. You have to start multiple processes. At the OS level, you have 8 processes running in case of Node, but at the OS level, you only have one process running that is starting multiple threads or multiple tasks in case of Rust. That's the difference between the two. When will the new Server 30 start? It most probably will start 1st of April. Yeah, 15th of April, something like that. Do we have to remember JavaScript predefined functions, async functions? Yes, you do. That is exactly what will be asked in interviews if you're planning for Super 30. All right. More questions. What is the real use of read file sync then when read file is so much better? Sometimes actually, I actually have a good answer to this that I'm not remembering now. Okay, in some cases it might make sense, but what is that case? There is actually no case where it might make sense to read files synchronously. honestly just cleaner code, I guess. अगर आपको तीन फाइल्स को एक के बाद एक ही रीड करना है, if you have to read three files one after the other, then this is just a little more cleaner to look at. Const fs equal to require fs const file 1 equal to fs dot read file sync a dot txt utf-8, and then after file 1 is read, then file 2, and then that's b dot txt, file 3, that is c.txt, and whatever, you can log them as well. This is like such like very easy to read compared to fs.read file a.txt utf-8. I mean, now I'm just writing the function here directly to just make it look more ugly than it is. Let's say the requirement is कि पहले पूरी file 1 read करो, then पूरी file 2 read करो, then पूरी file 3 read करो, one after the other. Let's say the requirement is like this. Then you can write a more optimal code like this. Or you can write a less optimal code that you see above. Because you can automatically tell the one above is much more easier to read compared to the one below. This thing that you see over here is called callback hell, that we'll understand when we reach promises. But ease of reading, this is so much easier to read and write compared to what is happening over here. That might be probably the only reason you might want to use sync versus async. Some resources to learn about SMTP. I don't think there's any videos. Do you want to create one yourself? There is this self-hosting SMTP service called Hiraka. If you want to really deep dive into how SMTP servers work, I forgot the name. There's like an open source SMTP server. Yeah, Hiraka or Haraka, whatever. Or you can, I mean, if you just have to use an SMTP server, that's much easier. But creating one is difficult because, again, deploying one is easy, but then there are reputation metrics on if Google thinks your SMTP server is well reputed or not. If it isn't, it'll put your mails in spam. So making sure all email providers like you is another challenge. What level of domain expertise are we required to make 3,000 a month, and what's aggressive, high impact stops must one take to achieve? I mean, starting off 3,000 like very ambitious. I think starting off me 1.5 lakh a month or 1.5k US dollars is a good starting point for anyone. That's a slightly steep jump as your first offer. That's like 3 lakhs a month, right, or whatever, 2.7 lakhs a month, which is very possible, but mostly with experience is a little more possible with salary bumps or whatever. But basically, if you're unemployed, then it's just easier to take a 1.5k offer. You don't have enough negotiating power for 3k, or you probably shouldn't also wait for a 3k offer. So I would just optimize for that. And then if you're at 1.5k a year and doing the same things you did for 1.5k, you can receive 3k in like another year or two. Are callbacks async await then same? No, they're very different. Callbacks and promises are very different. We'll understand promises, you'll understand the difference between the two. Which cold wallet is better, Telegram or Ledger Nano? Telegram or Tan Game? ये तो मैं पहली बार सुन रहा हूँ यार. I use a Ledger. You can choose whatever you want. But there's another one called Keystone that a lot of people use. This is the first time I'm hearing about something called however you pronounce it. But I have never used this. This is OG, sort of been working for many years. I just take that. If three functions are in callback queue, how does it order? जो पहले आया वो पहले जाएगा. There's another concept of macro and micro queues that we can get into if you want to eventually. But right now, first come first serve. Does internship in compulsory to get a job 10 LP as a fresher or knowledge base enough? Generally enough. If you're in college, it's just easier to crack an internship, convert full time compared to get a full time offer while you're in college, which is why it's the easier route. 6-month intern followed by full time. I don't think if you've graduated, it's been a year, doesn't matter. Intern may or may not help. Most probably will not help. You can, after graduation and it's been 6 months, getting a full time offer is probably as difficult as getting an internship. Hey, my stream gets paused when I set anything on the command. Oh boy. I don't know. Let's see. My stream gets, I will have to look at the exact inputs and outputs to debug. Your command is not very easy for me to read, honestly. You have too many flags in there. One thing, I mean, does it not convert only? Or it does convert and then does not, run? What is the command? Let's see. This is like very hard to read, bro. Scale 256H144. God, it's been like a while since I've written these and seen these. Yeah, it's like very hard for me to read, honestly. From what I can tell, you are creating an M3U8. From the looks of it, looks fine. They're like, there's probably a much simpler command to create, whatever, convert to a 256 ratio um, and whatever, create an M3U8. This is a slightly more complicated one. Every time I have done it, and I've seen, these systems being deployed in production for videos that are being uploaded, thousands of videos a day, and it just works. There's no simple reason for why this might not work. Although, okay, I see it now. You have an RTMP input. This is where things get tricky. Actually, no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Yeah, bro, what you need is Nginx. Sorry, there's your answer. What you're doing might work, but basically easier than debugging. It might just make sense to use the Nginx RTMP package. So this is your question. This right here, and what you're doing is you're taking input from an RTMP here, MediaMux.net, and you're outputting into an M3 U8, which is fine. But then there is this Nginx RTMP module that pretty much does the same thing, exposes the same thing. It's very well battle tested. I've seen it in production, in many places. What happens is you create an Nginx server, you put a config file, you start a bunch of flags, it exposes an RTMP URL for you. So rather than taking input from here, wherever you are passing in this input, you would pass the input of this specific server, receive the RTMP data, converts it to M3U8, MPD, multiple resolutions like butter, and just works. So it is more of a suggestion on where to move compared to debugging your command. So yeah, I mean, this should just should take you less than half an hour to set up, and should just work. All right. Any other questions? Web3 assignment on X. Let's see. Oh, you created a browser extension only? Oh yeah, you did. That's very good. Shout out to Neil Contractor. This is not your real name, is it? Looks pretty good, man. I like what you've done, but does it do? Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, sorry. Let me share my screen. This guy created the whatever wallet with the extension, but it doesn't. Does it pop up on dApps? It doesn't. Otherwise, you would have showed. That's the difficult part here. Otherwise, just any website that's stored as an extension. That's not the point of making an extension. The point is that any website should be able to, if I have your wallet installed and I go to tensor.trade, and I click on connect wallet, your wallet should appear automatically over there. For example, if I go over here and click on connect wallet, notice it shows me Phantom, Solfair, Backpack, and a third one, because I have Solfair, Phantom, and Backpack over here. I'm also logged into TipLink, which is why it shows it here. Yours should automatically appear here, which I'm assuming does not happen right now. So you need to add that logic. Basically, become wallet adapter friendly, which I don't think you've done. Else would have shown it in the video. So I would add that. That's a difficult bit. Otherwise, it's like, take it's just a website that you can write an extension, but there's no real extension benefits that you're getting out of it. All right. I'm surprised we were able to get through this class without any internet issues. If you did see internet issues, there's a local recording posted by tomorrow at max, and there'll be like a lot of assignments this week. So expect 100, at least 50 questions, one after the other, that you should try to solve, and paste it in ChatGPT to get the solution, or if you want, Prash can do the same and give you the solutions, but generally try to solve them yourself. And if you've not done coding before and not done JavaScript before, probably makes sense to spend a lot of time doing it, like doing these problems by hand. All right, I call it here. Contest is coming in 15 days, guys. It'll probably be syntax heavy, maybe some slightly DSA heavy. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I'll see you guys then during the contest as well, but mostly I'll see you on Sunday in the Web3 class. Have a good night, folks. Bye bye.